Thank you so much, Dario, and thank you all for being here. My name is Martin Langelo-Lien, co-founder and CEO of Volt. And before starting Volt, me and my co-founder ran an SMS marketing company for numerous years, feeling a lot of the pains of operating and scaling operations for companies that operate in the ISV layer. So kind of opposed to some of the various different discussions that we've had over this week, where a lot of it is focused on, of course, the compliance and pieces that needs to be navigated due to bad actors in the space. Now, a lot of these pain points and a lot of these regulations and pieces that are being implemented is of course also impacting the good traffic, the good actors that needs to be able to upkeep with all of these regulations. So as we were operating our company, we of course felt a lot of this pain, and I'll be sharing a lot of those lessons today. Part of building and scaling out these systems was also, of course, as is typical with ISVs, building into multiple different CPaaS partners. And each time we built into a new one, we ended up rebuilding the entire sending engine. Still, we always had numerous issues with deliverability due to changing regulation and rules. And due to these various different pain points, we actually found ourselves spending more time on dealing with delivery issues than even building the products and solutions that our customers was paying us for. And it was this epiphany and realization that really led us to creating the company that we founded, and why I'm talking here today with Volt, where we're creating the messaging operations layer, helping companies be able to actually focus on their strategies and their revenue driving solutions and good customer experiences as opposed to just operational headaches. And a lot of the information that I'll be sharing with today, in fact, all of the information I'll be sharing today is not theoretical. Everything is pulling from our, of course, painful lessons, but also from hundreds of software companies that we've worked with and billions of messaging transactions that we've seen throughout our partners. So before jumping into that, though, I want to take us all down kind of a memory lane. You might remember when every company had an email server in their basement, when everybody was operating their own servers, had their own email server specialists, and that might seem eternities ago. It feels ridiculous today. However, that was just 15 years ago. And when we look upon kind of the correlation between how email evolved into allowing companies to just truly focus on the experience as opposed to just the management hubbubaloo that it became, there's a very strong correlation to what we see for ISV companies in SMS today. And of course, this shouldn't be news to anybody in this hall, but last year, 2.1 trillion SMS messages were sent by businesses. However, that's just counting SMS, not RCS, WhatsApp, and the rest of the new channels that's coming out. Still, the impact of this is much more than just the 160 characters was sent 2.1 trillion times. Of course, each of these messages should and does encompass an experience for the customer, either through a authentication notification to let you get into your secure access. Maybe it was a appointment reminder to a really critical medical appointment, or even emergency messages meant to save lives. And even though the impact far outweighs the actual message number, it still is being operated and built like email was 15 years ago, with companies spending millions of dollars and having dedicated resources internally to have to even operate at a general basic level. So when looking at how email impacted the industry, when new operational infrastructure came into the space, like MailChimp and SendGrid, we saw a massive outsized impact to the overall ecosystem, with volumes increasing more than 10x. That same revolution is really what we're expecting and seeing, and now hopefully pushing for with SMS as well. The only difference is email was on a singular standardized protocol. SMS, on the other hand, as most of you probably already know, is far more complicated. Of course, there is the regulations, but every single channel having a different regulation. Also, every single provider that you build into has different error codes and different systems built into each individual channel. Now that we're looking at the various different channels that's coming to market with RCS and, of course, WhatsApp Business being more and more prominent in North America as well, we are anticipating this to simply increase. But looking at even our customers today and some of the data that we're seeing, even today, there's about 3.2 full-time employees on average in most enterprises that are building and maintaining the infrastructure that it takes to register new phone numbers, setting up customers, and being able to ensure that there is enough oversight of removing bad actors so that they can keep their messaging going. These are not people building actual strategies to drive the revenue. This is simply to keep the lights on. And that's costing enterprises upwards of $4.2 million annually, just in operational overhead. And the shocking part of this is that 68% of that number is hidden costs. These are hidden costs that's hidden in engineering, in compliance, and lastly, in opportunity. On the engineering side, of course, self-descripting is self-explanatory. It's building into the various different tools and systems that you need to be able to operate in the first place. Then you have, of course, every single time a customer complains, which you might be shocked to realize that every time a customer complains today to a software company, oftentimes they don't even know until the customer complained. And not only is that an issue by itself, but when you also layer into the fact that the engineers then have to start looking into the problems from the very fundamental core of it, they first start checking, of course, that message. Then they check the logs for that company. Then they check the logs for the entire organization and the entire feature. This, on average, takes 13 hours of engineering resources. That is extremely pricey time. And then you look at the compliance cost. Of course, as everybody is well aware, the cost of just one TCPA violation is far outweighed of what they can spend to be able to put resources and guardrails in place to avoid it in the first place. You simply can't afford not to focus on it. But that is an expense that every single software company that adds this as a resource and a channel has to pay. And lastly, it's opportunity cost. When product managers and various different software companies want to launch new solutions, they have to end up spending far more and far greater time and resources to be able to get something out. In other words, oftentimes they just avoid it entirely. So they don't have to pay that in the first place. And of course, the marketing teams that don't get to send what they want to send because they can't possibly account for all of the other compliance risk and of course the technical burden to get it set up. So if we were to summarize kind of the quotes from our customers and our kind of market research, it really gets put into this simple quote behind me. SMS features take a lot of manual effort to build, maintain, and improve. And it really comes down to the simple fact that it demands extensive internal tooling to be able to work in the first place. The compliance is complicated and time-consuming and ever-changing. And lastly, the CPaaS not having standardized error codes and systems also mean that whenever you've built it, you haven't built it for good, you've built it once. And you have to build it again next time you move to the next vendor. So that really results in the infrastructure that you see behind me. This is very similar to the infrastructure we had when we were operating as an SMS marketing company. But when you're looking at it from the standpoint of how the companies are operating, every single company that is building into CPaaS has to have their own provider-specific tooling. This takes a ton of energy and cost to be able to build. And oftentimes, companies don't realize this the first time they build into a company, naturally. They realize it the second time they do. And at that point, they have thousands of hours in sunk cost that's already buried in their investment into their SMS feature, and their SMS feature is already rolled out, so they can't retract it from their customers. So they're kind of just stuck having to continuously build, maintain, sunset-ish, but they can't always move all their numbers off, so they have to maintain even the old infrastructures. So really the cost, of course, we can talk about the numbers, but the hidden cost is far more impactful. Just looking at kind of the critical notifications that never get sent to their destination, the authentication codes that fail during customer transactions, the compliance violations that create regulatory risk and direct fines, all of which really impact into the simple last point here with customer experience suffering. This is something that's, of course, hurting the actual brands. But how does this kind of really tie into the business as a whole? It's not a technical pain, it's a business pain. And I want to give some real examples of customers and how they have felt each of these. So the first one, I'm not going to be able to say the brand's name, sadly, but the first one is a healthcare company doing an extremely traditional and expected campaign. They were simply sending appointment reminders. They wanted to increase the actual show-up rate, and they saw immense value in it. However, suddenly out of the blue, they saw less impact of it. And they were convinced that the SMS strategy that they had didn't work. In fact, it turned out that it was just a deliverability issue. They had not optimized, and they started using a bit.ly link. When they started using the bit.ly link, the messages didn't go through. And nobody told them that. They didn't have the tribal knowledge to be able to even acknowledge that. So they blamed it all on the strategy and also on the providers. So they simply abandoned it. And that led to lower show-up rates and lower revenue and a big impact to that business. Then we could talk about an e-commerce company that was sending out authentication codes for a very high-ticket item product that they were selling during Black Friday. Now, they had registered, they were set up properly, but due to the fact that they didn't account for the massive spike during Black Friday, the carriers throttled them, as they should, of course, but that led to the customers getting their notification for the authentication code 15 minutes late. So no customer is going to sit there on the e-commerce site and wait 15 minutes for the final authentication. So they ended up with a bunch of abandoned carts and a lot of loss in revenue from what would otherwise be a really successful campaign in their most important day of the year. And then lastly, a fintech company that had probably the most ingrained solution around SMS. This was a company that was leveraging SMS as their core go-to-market. They were sending SMS notifications tied to credit card transactions, and this was representative of a larger-ish bank that was trying to push this out. However, the 10DLC registration was wrongfully set up. So the first day they launched, they had gotten some messages through because they were unregistered, but when they fully went to market, all their messages failed because now they were no longer sending 5 messages an hour or lower. And of course, that led to the consumer that had now signed up for this fintech service completely abandoning it. They ended up getting a huge churn issue and basically had to sunset the feature entirely, all due to the fact that they didn't have the visibility into 10DLC and campaign resources there. So all of the commonality between all of this is ultimately that the CPaaS was wrongfully blamed. This is all information that is, of course, out there. However, it's largely described as tribal knowledge. It's something that we all might have experienced and seen, and we could probably all talk through them with it, but hard to scale from the position that they were in. So how is this, as we have all acknowledged kind of now, this problem going to be evolving moving forward? Now, we know, we've talked about this week, like SMS by itself is not going to be the rapid growth. However, due to the new channels with RCS and WhatsApp Business and the new use cases, predictions is that in the next 10 years, the volume of transactional messages for businesses is going to increase by about 89%. And simultaneously, the operational complexity is going to more than 3x due to the fact that there is additional channels. And as you add additional channels on top of a structure that already has additional providers, they now have to more or less increase the complexity of all they're sending each and every time. So if we were to kind of summarize this, it's really going into 2 specific buckets. There are the regulatory challenges and changes, and then there's the technical growth. So on the regulatory side, as we saw with 10DLC, of course, has massive impact on the ISVs. They were not prepared, and I mean, largely they were notified, but they were not prepared. And simply new channels and new regulation is going to have the same exact impact. ISVs and software companies largely don't react until there is an adverse effect of not reacting. And that's also why they don't prepare. And it makes it incredibly hard to then see the impact to the industry, because they end up abandoning it again, blaming the ecosystem and blaming the CPaaSs for not having them prepared when, in fact, this is something that really shouldn't be their bother and their problem. And then, of course, we got the global regulations. When we look at the various different rules, similar to what I've been talking to some of you about this week even, with the changes we saw in Ireland, where just this last week they rolled out that every single business that is not registered is going to get a message that is followed up by a second message that said, this is coming from an unregistered number. And of course, as a brand, they can't afford the risk to their business from this. But that is also something that, unless you're keeping an eye on it, as a global brand with global presence, and that needs to be sending messages in multiple different countries, they can't possibly stay on top of all of this. And then lastly, the carrier requirements, which of course, like was previously talked about in just this prior talk, is getting stricter and stricter due to bad actors. And justifiably so. I think all of us want it to be stricter for the bad actors, but again, it is placing a burden on the software companies and the ISVs. And then on the technical growth side, of course, the new channels, like I talked about, is going to be largely increasing the complexity massively for the engineering teams to be able to build into and set up new rules. For RCS, let's say there will be new throttling requirements and everything else. That's something that then has to be built and productized on the back end for each software company that has this. Then we got the integration complexity, like I also said, with each provider that they have, each new channel, like they already have with 10DLC, toll-free, and shortcode, all of which has to be built and managed separately. This is also going to add massive complexity. And lastly, the scale requirement. 89% growth in traffic is naturally going to put more load on everyone's system. So ultimately, kind of the solution is not more resources. It's not additional bigger engineering teams and doubling from 3.2 full-time people to 6.4. It's changing the behavior. Right now, if companies were able to unify into a single API and input to be able to handle the operations, similar to what we saw with email, with SendGrid, being able to basically treat the operations aspect of this like an infrastructure as well, it would ultimately simplify the entire process. And also looking at this as more of a strategic shift for focusing on actual good messages as opposed to just operational burden, similar to how we suffered and why we even started Volt in the first place. And with this structure, it would also be possible for companies to be able to have real-time analytics across all of their messaging. I'll pull a quote from one of our partners. They had 3 providers that they needed to have, one that there was legacy, another one that they had as their primary sender, and one for failovers. But since they didn't see all of the traffic across the board, they basically said, we're basically blind. We might have 80% of our traffic on a provider with really good analytics, but since we can't see all of it, we just don't look. And that is, of course, costing them massively and also costing the entire ecosystem since they can't spot the trends across their entire messaging to spot bad actors and catch them before they even become a problem. So this transformation, of course, similarly to what we saw with email, kind of operationalizing it all, is going to have a massive positive impact to the entire ecosystem. When businesses have a dedicated operations layer, we can expect that they will be sending more messages because they are now able to focus on what the right strategy is, not on what is the burden, so they can switch it to a positive. They were able to decrease the support escalations, which is a massive benefit to the CPaaS companies that currently today has to deal with a lot of repeat questions on problems that really is more of an educational issue than an actual issue. And lastly, innovation accelerates. We've seen with companies that they are able to launch their features about 85% faster due to the fact that they don't have to build additional integrations to be able to roll it out. This means that also for providers, we'll be able to see traffic 85% faster, which is incredibly impactful when you are on a metered basis revenue side. So what that means for brands, of course, less headache, you can trust the channel, and you can actually get deliverability a lot higher. Then you got the ISVs and the software companies that will no longer have to deal with the headache. That was the inspiration of why we started in the first place as well. Then you got the providers that obviously get the higher volume, the decrease in support requests, and overall a better trust in their customers. And lastly, for the carriers, a much healthier network and a lot healthier traffic, since customers can spot bad actors before they do anything that would hurt the network. So right now, we're watching the next great shift in business operations infrastructure. And when companies can focus on sending the right message at the right time, as opposed to just focusing on fighting fires with operations, that's when we see messages getting sent at a much higher volume and benefiting everybody. The future of business messaging isn't about managing operations, but it's about creating amazing customer experiences and getting the most out of why the channel is even so effective in the first place. The incredible open rates and the good customer experience of getting the right message at the right time. Just think about how it was 15 years ago when people were discussing whether or not they should have their own self-hosted email server and manage their own operations and deliverability, or use a system like SendGrid. That is a preposterous discussion today. And I would argue that is the same thing that we are expecting 10 years from now, when we look back on how companies are operating today, handling the pain points alone, when they really should be able to focus on just getting it to work and not worry. Thank you all for your time today. I'm looking forward to discussing how we can change and cause this transition together and partner up. Thank you all.
Let me start with the first question. So it sounds to me, and apologies, it's MWC. It's been a long couple of days already. But you're talking about a new category, effectively. Is that true?
That's correct. Yeah, so I would say the category itself of messaging ops is something, and messaging operations, I guess for long, is something that has existed for years. If you look at the biggest ISVs and software companies out there that are operating large enterprise-sized text message marketing solutions, they have teams of upward of 50, and they already have directors of messaging operations. However, the software kind of approach to this is new.
That's new. So here we go. And who are you selling to then? Your main targets then? Is that the enterprises?
Yeah, so the software companies and the ISVs. So really the way that we price and focus is on helping them alleviate the engineering burden and the operational costs that they are experiencing. So this is something that we're working directly with them on charging for. This is not something that we're charging any CPaaS or partners to be able to do to alleviate the pain.
So they got almost a resales opportunity here. They can go back and do more business.
Absolutely.
Okay. But let's go back to your metaphor, which I really like about this. And 15 years ago, the email server, because I can go back to that and thinking. I remember when people said no more, and usually there was that little incident. There was no more. It's hardware usually related, no more space, no more whatever. But what is the incident here what is the thing that makes people tipping over and say, I need to rely to messaging up in case of why do your customer come to you? What's happening to them?
Yeah, so I would say the biggest and initial change, and was really when we also had the aha moment for Volt, was when it went from, hey, this is a real big nuisance. We felt the pain ourselves. Infrastructure was tough and hard to navigate already. But when you layer on the registration requirements that came with 10DLC, every company had to rebuild all of their existing infrastructure. And that's really when everybody started taking a second look at it and realizing just how much they were actively spending. Again, it was easier to see just due to the fact that it went from being this hidden cost to suddenly being this tangible cost of, oh my God, I have to now invest 3 months, 3 to 6 months for some, of engineering resources simply to enable people to be throttled correctly based on the brand and campaign score that they have. And I mean, I think that's when people realized, wow, we probably shouldn't be spending this much money on it. And that's kind of been, I think, the commonality of the aha moment that has led to our growth so far.
And what would you say? Is that the same for the CPaaS, your resellers, your ISVs?
Yeah. I mean, for the CPaaS companies too, of course, like the ability for them to not have to handle the friction that occurs with companies transferring from one provider to the next, handling thousands of registrations, and all of the additional labor and work that is required to be able to ensure that all of that traffic is clean and good. That is probably the biggest value for them as well, and where a lot of our partners bring us in.
Well, you mentioned some of those mistakes, some of those things that potentially people didn't even notice, but then realized it was costing them a lot of undelivered messages. So give us a bit of a top three, if you want.
Top three.
What are the top three things on compliance side that might really impact the ability to deliver campaigns?
Yeah, so I would say probably number one is the lack of understanding of links and what is allowed to send, what is not. That is something we see universally. Everybody loves to use bit.ly links, but of course, especially for SMS, because you get charged by the character and by the segment count. So having long links that ties to the actual business is just not financially preferred. I would say secondarily, it's sending words that they didn't even know was an issue. If you're running a CRM company, which is kind of a great example of our type of customer, then they allow their customers to send the type of messaging that they want to. And in doing so, they're sending freely what it is that they want. But let's say that you're running a lawn care service and you're having a special on weeding. Well, you sent weed, and now you got your phone number blocked, and suddenly you're not able to send any more campaigns. And this is something that, again, the software companies don't even see until the customer is complaining 3 weeks later. And I think lastly would probably be more so around the lack of understanding on registrations. People resubmit and resubmit and resubmit the same information without truly understanding what is it that the carriers want to see, what is it that the TCR needs to see to be able to approve its NDLC campaign, and all of which, of course, we help them with.
Good. Well, true to my track record, I'm over time. Well, but thanks, Martin. It's been great listening to you and introducing a new category, as I say.
Thank you so much.
Thank you much.